Call a meeting of Winona Planning Commission meeting in September to order. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, at this time, I'll state for the record that since we're under a storm warning or watch or whatever, maybe both, we're going to try and hurry this up so we can get out of Dodge before it gets here. All right, let's have a discussion or approval of the agenda. That shouldn't take too long.
Move to approve.
Chris moved to approve and
Or
Arlie,
Kelly.
or Kelly, excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm thinking wrong again. I get that. And Arlie seconded it. All those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The agenda is approved. All right, did everybody get a chance to look at the minutes? Any comments or a motion?
I move to approve the minutes as they're presented.
Steve moves to approve the minutes as presented.
What's her name seconded?
Kelly is going to second it this time. Hey, I got it right the second time. All right, all those in favor of approval of the minutes say aye.
Aye.
All those against say nay. The minutes are approved as presented. All right, the first item on the agenda is Winona County Zoning Ordinance Amendment, Interim Use Permits, page 11. Discuss the proposed interim use permit zoning ordinance amendment and make a recommendation to the county board. Staff, at this time, go for it.
The Minnesota State Attorney General has found that time limits and sunset provisions for CUPs are not consistent with state law. The interim use permit is a tool used by many counties in Minnesota and has been approved by the state in order to allow counties, like cities, who have had the tool for longer, to have the appropriate zoning tool, I guess, to use that word again, for placing time constraints on particular uses to be decided by this body. So a temporary use of property until either a particular date, the occurrence of a particular event, or until zoning regulations no longer permit it. And that's 462.3597. I know you've heard this before, but I just wanted to do a quick update on where we are in the process. The public hearing for this interim use amendment was held on 7/19. We didn't have a meeting last month. And this body is required to make a recommendation to the board because the extension was granted by November 16th. So the public hearing part's done. The next thing is the recommendation to the county board, and then the county board's timeline is established. So the same process basically would take place for both an IUP and CUP. You get an application. CUP is run with the land. The temporary nature of an IUP might be suitable for many uses, and they expire perhaps on a particular date or if a particular occurrence happens.
Okay, move to adjourn.
The proposed ordinance allows any uses currently listed as a conditional use to be determined to be an interim use if there is a date or an event or a determination that can be identified that would terminate it at a specific time, or at the conclusion of something like an asphalt hot mix plant that is done when the roadway has been repaired. So the next step for this body is to continue your discussions, which you left off in July, and then make a recommendation to the county board. Thank you very much. I know I'm talking fast, but by 8:20, very nasty weather is going to hit this area, and so we're moving briskly tonight. Thank you for your time, and I'll be available for questions, as will Assistant County Attorney Nuttall. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'm going to open it up for questions, comments, or discussion from any member of the Planning Commission. Steve?
I got a few questions. So you stated the words were until zoning regulations no longer permit it. So yeah, it it's on the back. It's up, you know. So the person comes in, is granted this, for example, they're granted the interim use permit, and it's decided we're going to change zoning regulations. If they would have had a conditional use permit, could zoning regulations change and take their permit away?
Council?
The provision about until zoning regulations no longer permitted, the way that we're reading it and the way that we would put it into that it's in our ordinance, is that only if you say in the permit that's issued, this is only effective until the ordinance changes. So if you only say it's effective to a particular date, and then the ordinance changes, it's the particular.
Prior to that date.
So you would have to specify that this permit's only good as long as this ordinance is in place. So if you don't specify that, then a change in the ordinance would not change the permit's effectiveness.
So you're saying the date of the IUP is the supersedes the zoning ordinance changing?
No.
No, it's the other way around.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misheard.
So if, in this particular scenario, the interim use permit gets, let's say it's for a solar array, we'll call it a 10-year one. So if we say that it's good for 10 years from the date of its issuance. But in that 10 years, we overhaul the zoning ordinance, make a lot of changes, and it would no longer be in compliance. It would still be grandfathered in because the only use of the property that we have specified, or the only deadline or sunset clause we've specified within that permit is the particular date. You can specify one or more things. You can say in there until 10 years from the date or the property is sold, and that would mean that either of those things would trigger it, but the zoning regulation change still would not.
Just for clarification, so today when we issue conditional use permits, we have the findings of fact and then we have conditions. So what you're saying is we would have to have a specific condition that said, if we change the zoning law, then this conditional use permit will be nullified.
There would be, the way that I have a draft that I've started working on for if this goes through. And the way that right now it currently reads is we're granting this conditional use permit to allow whatever it is, as long as the following conditions are met. There would be a piece in there where you would have to make a finding of a deadline, and then it would specify that this permit is valid until a particular date and/or the occurrence of the particular event and/or the zoning ordinance remains in effect, and you would have to choose and put in there what is appropriate.
So if this commission chooses not to put it in that particular conditional use permit, then it is not an issue.
Correct.
Okay.
Steve, have you got more?
Well, so that's kind of still leaves me a little concerned that the way the language is written on page 13, the first line, that you understand that and we understand that, but the language doesn't seem to say it. It just says, or until zoning regulations no longer permit it. Picked up by a new planning director and a new planning commission in 8 years, they would just look at it as, no, sorry, we've changed the regulations, your permit's no longer good.
The reason it's written that way is because that's the way the statute.
Yep,
That's what the statute allows.
I got that, but can't we add to it?
We can, I don't know, there's no ruling on whether or not any other form of deadline would be appropriate, but the way that we would issue the permits would be very explicit. The permit forms would be, it's only valid until a particular date or until this happens, and if you choose to include it, or until zoning ordinance or regulations no longer permit.
Vince, do you have a follow-up
I'm
question?
just wondering if we put an or, there's one or on the third line, if there was an or above that, between those to clarify that these are not a collection, but rather they stand individually. I think that's what Steve is getting at, is that correct?
I need to see it in writing.
There is an Oxford comment in there that indicates that it's a list of 3 separate clauses that could, one or more could be met, would need to be met. So we would just specify which ones are which.
Don, do you have a follow-up question on this subject, or?
I have a pre-question. What did I miss before 7 o'clock?
Lots.
Oh, you didn't miss anything, but we're trying to get out of here before the storm hits. So we did the pledge and agenda.
I don't understand what you were trying to say with the or. What?
Particular event or until zoning regulations change.
If after a particular date, I understand what Stephanie says, that there are clauses and the comma indicates that it's a list. I think if we had the word or, though, in there, that people that would feel more comfortable about these.
The word or is in there.
No, wait a minute. No, it's not where he wants to put it, and
Is there some alternative
where
that
you-
would suffice
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
to clarify this further for those who have concerns?
Don's got one over.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I don't care what statute says. I do care that it says the county may do this and may do that as far as an IUP goes. It doesn't say it must do this or it must do that. So we can do whatever we want with the ordinance. We can draft it as we want it.
Or we could ignore it. Nothing says you have to have it, I don't think.
The IUP. Yep.
Mark?
I think the interim use after where it's no longer permitted, can't we just add a sentence there saying it will be up to the planning commission to put in which one of them three that they want to use as a
We could put something to the effect of, as determined by the.
planning commission at the time of,
County board, but yes.
or the county board, or,
Yeah, we could put in there that it would be, the triggering event would be specified in the permit by the county board, not the reply.
I would like to see that.
Yeah. I can't, I just couldn't support it the way it's written.
Council?
Yes.
Are you done there, or? All right. My question is, I'm under the understanding that CUPs and IUPs are, to be applied for because the zoning regulations do not permit that use already. So how are we going to differentiate between that and the wording up there that says zoning regulations no longer permit it?
Well, there's three levels. There's not permitted, there's conditionally permitted, which would include both conditional use permits as well as interim use permits, because anything that can be a conditional use could also be an interim use if it would meet one of those criteria. And then there's allowable without a permit. So this only addresses the things that if regulations change and move something from conditionally permitted to no longer permitted at all under any circumstances, then that would be a zoning regulation, but it would be grandfathered in unless it was specified that if the ordinance changes, it could not continue. Does that make sense?
Well, it might make sense, but I'm still confused. Don?
I'm opposed to the notion that the planning commission or the county board could unilaterally decide that a petitioner gets an IUP or a CUP. It should be at the discretion of the petitioner what they want. If somebody comes in for a use that requires a permit, it shouldn't be up to the county to decide, well, we'll give them a permit, but we're going to put a date on it, a date on the life of it. That should be the decision of the petitioner. So the petitioner should be able to choose whether this be an IUP or a CUP, not some collection on the planning commission or on the county board. It needs to be firm in ordinance that it's at the discretion of the petitioner.
And I know the last meeting I was at, I made that same case. Is that what you feel the language reflects now?
No, I think the way that it's written now, is the applicant can make their desires clear, but at the end of the day, if the county board thinks that it's not appropriate to not have an event triggering the end of a permit, it's up to the county board. The same way that it's been now, where we've been doing the conditional use permits and putting an end date on there, you can add an end date, or the end dates that were added to conditional use permits in the past could have been put there by the county board regardless of whether the applicant wanted them there or not. Usually practice is to talk to the applicant and make sure they're okay with the conditions, but the county board at any time could have said, we're issuing this permit, but only if you can follow these conditions, and if you don't want to follow them, that's your problem. So it's the same kind of concept here. They can ask for it, but if a date needs to end the permit, it's up to the county board.
Maybe give you guys an example of how this, just there's something that's come up in the last few weeks where, I had mentioned before it might give the county or property owners a little bit more flexibility in some cases. We have a situation, I won't mention the name or precisely where it's at, but there's a case where they have multiple farm dwellings on the property and they operate as a farm. It's come to our attention that one of the occupants wants out. When those permits were issued, they're very specifically that they have to be farm dwellings. Meanwhile, while they're restructuring the farm organization, it may take some time. The owner of that structure would like to rent that house out, possibly an Airbnb or something to that. The way the ordinance is today, it's very clear. My answer was no, you cannot rent that out. It has to be a farm dwelling. Either you remove it or it has to be taken over by a member of the farming operation. An interim use permit would allow something out of the box where they could come forward with the interim use to ask for perhaps a 2 or 3 year IUP to rent that out in an Airbnb situation until they restructure the farm ownership. It's just, I guess I've seen that as one example of how this could be implemented and where it would be up to the planning commission and the county board to say, well, maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, but it would give flexibility in some cases on that.
Gone.
In my view, in that case, the petitioner, or whatever, the holder of the conditional use permit should be able to come to the county board and ask for an amendment to his conditional use permit and a date put on it. We have it as mere opinion that the date on a conditional use permit cannot be enforced. There's no case law that supports that. It hasn't been challenged and tried, and it's worked for us since 1971. We can continue with what we have, and if there's problems that develop in the future, address them then. We don't have a problem now.
Chair.
Mark.
On that point, one thing that's really bothered me about this was something, whenever we allow an on-farm dwelling or a non-farm dwelling on less than 40 acres, we always put the paragraph in about the farming, that they are moving to the country and that they are living. Will that still be there in any interim use permit? Because now that does not run with the land.
But it would be putting them on notice that that is a condition that is being issued, that we're going to allow this, but you're now,
Okay, because the same thing in your situation you just listed, that would, not automatically, but that would be part of that interim use permit as well, where it would say, you are in the country and you will have to put up with them things, because that.
In that example, keep in mind that was issued as a permitted use.
Right.
That was issued originally over the counter where it had no public review process associated with it.
Do we know that that language is enforceable? That we advise the deed holder that they should expect farming operations, but if they should later the neighbor decide to bring an action, I don't think that language is enforceable.
I think that there's no statute that prohibits that from being there. We can put that condition in because the statute, everything says we can, and there's nothing that says we have to have an amendment to our ordinance if we want to be able to do that. Which is why we want the interuse permit language, because we can't put deadlines on things unless we put this tool in statute comes out that says you can't have this, you can only have this language if you add this to your ordinance, then we would be in the same boat with that language as well.
So we don't have a problem.
Okay, Chris.
Mr. Chairman. So I think this is probably the fourth time that we've debated this issue. Aside from Mark's recent comment, everything that I've heard, I've already heard these arguments before, and some of them more than once. So I think tonight we should decide up or down and move forward. So if it's appropriate, I would kind of like to go ahead and have a vote.
Which, is it a motion?
Yeah.
To do what?
To vote whether to recommend this or not recommend it to the board, up or down, one way or another.
So is your motion to recommend or not recommend?
I recommend. I think we should go ahead and approve it.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion to,
Mark has.
Mark.
Just a question.
Eugene finishes
As
the
it's,
statement.
as it's printed? As it's printed.
I could, the previous discussion about the language, as I was sitting here, at the end of 5.5, you could add the sentence, any such permit shall specify the date and or event of termination.
okay, that's,
I think that's what we should do. Do we need an amendment to my motion, or can I say it's to include that additional language?
all right, we have a motion and a second to either vote this interim use permit up or down. Is there any discussion on this motion?
Of course.
Steve?
Well, I think Vince is-
Can Stephanie or Chris repeat that, where we're changing that phrase at the end of 5.5, please?
Just adding a sentence at the end, so we're not changing anything, but the sentence would read, any such permit shall specify the date and or event of termination.
Okay.
Okay. So I know we've had this discussion before, and I didn't make the last meeting, but the meeting prior to that, I made it clear that my wishes were that this would be something that's an additional tool for the citizenry, and where we use the word shall in here, my wishes would have been that we would have used the word may, and that the petitioner has the option. Are they coming in to get a conditional use permit, or are they coming in to make application for an interim use permit? And I see that that's not incorporated into the language, and the question has been called. So given that we didn't get to sort this out before you made the motion, I can't support it.
I guess I understand what you're saying, but I think your approach might add undue deliberation on the part of staff and planning commission and the county board, because if somebody comes in and says, I want an interim use permit, and they pay their money and the staff goes through all the analysis and they come up with really a conditional use permit would be better for your particular circumstance, then they have to go through that all again. I mean, wouldn't it be best if the staff does the analysis and says this fits best, and then have it go from there? I think.
How is the staff supposed to know what fits best?
And how are they supposed to know? I mean, the petitioner comes in to tell them what they want and what they want to apply for. It's not staff's place to kind of refabricate their application.
Well, I mean, let's take the example that we've discussed before of a solar, a community solar, okay? Let's say somebody comes in and they say, I want a CUP. I want it to go with the land. I don't want an end date, et cetera. And we deny it because I've heard comments from this group that after X number of years, they should really be decommissioned. So it really should have been an IUP because it should have had an end date, okay? Then they have to go through it again and come back here and say, okay, I'll go with an IUP, have it end in 30 years.
Well,
Why go through
yeah.
that?
I'm going to fall on the side of empowering the citizen every time, not empowering the government to impose their wishes and conditions on the citizen. And this is, I'm sorry, it's not what I originally envisioned, and I know Marcia Ward wanted this brought forward, but it's not close enough to me to support.
Don?
Kelly, your statement about somebody coming in and asking for an IUP when they should have had a CUP, I think that challenges the competence of staff. I trust that her staff would help a petitioner explain the differences between the options, the IUP and the CUP. Certainly they would do that. And secondly, now did I lose my second thought? I'm having a hard time with that these days. Excuse me, it might come to me again.
Harley?
Well, how would they know what they need? Unless, like they'd have to go out there and see what they needed to decide if they needed a CUP or not. So I guess, I don't know. I can't support it.
My second point, I'm sorry, if I may, is that we can still put a date on the CUP.
You have legal liability there when you do that.
Who does?
The county does.
How do they?
Because that is not
They
enforceable.
may have to defend the citizen in the future. That's fine.
Why risk that if there's a tool available that you can do it?
I think Stephanie she's only brought forward an interpretation, and Don's position is that that's not either a regulation or a statute or case law. It's only one person's interpretation of that.
It's a lot more than one person's interpretation. That's what's being taught throughout the state. That's what's being taught by NCIT. That's what we were taught during Jay Squires' training when he was here last year. That's what all the property law experts that are teaching all the trainings for government employees are saying is, if you want to have a deadline, you have to put an interim use provision in your ordinance. You can't do it otherwise. So it's more than one person's interpretation.
If you take a CAU or whatever it's called course, they're going to refer to this opinion that exists out there, that there's this opinion that this might not be enforceable. But at this point, it's only an opinion.
And we all know about opinions.
Right. You put seven people in a room, you have 7 different opinions.
What I would say is the Constitution gave every person in this county some freedoms. I want us to be public servants, servants of the people, period. And what's going to wind up happening as we whittle away on somebody's, maybe a past guy, I don't think he's going to be Attorney General anymore. I think we're going to have a new one. His opinion is not terribly important. Case law was the first thing I asked. We have none. I'm not going to support this.
Okay, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I think we're rehashing everything
We
we've
don't have to.
already heard before. I don't think anybody's opinion is changing. I would like to call the question if I could.
Okay.
So that takes a two-thirds majority vote. So whatever 2/3 of this board is, has to be in agreement with calling the question.
Okay.
All right, the question has been called. Now, this is just to have the vote, right?
Just to vote on Chris's question. There's
Yeah,
still more
right.
things I
This
want to
is
discuss.
this is just to vote up or down. Chris is calling the question.
Or Kelly's calling.
Or Kelly's question.
What's your name? Whatever.
Yeah. All right, we all understand what we're doing here. Hearing no negatives, all those in favor of Kelly's calling the question say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed to Kelly's calling the question say aye.
Aye. I still have more stuff I wanted to discuss before we voted.
Okay, well, it's a 2/3 vote
Yep.
in favor, so now we get to vote on the,
You amended.
no, there is no amendment, it's just
Yeah,
the.
there is an amendment, but I accepted the amendment, yeah.
Okay, so we get to vote on the revision the one sentence revision to the motion.
The motion that I understand is on the floor at this point is to recommend approval of the ordinance amendment as presented with the addition of the one sentence to the end of 5.5. Is that correct?
Will you repeat the sentence, please?
Any such permit shall specify the date and/or event of termination.
We're just voting on just the amendment?
No,
And,
the
and
whole thing.
the date and what?
And/or event of termination.
And I don't think that satisfies the concerns, but about the no longer, until zoning regulations no longer permit.
The question has been called.
Yeah, we can't discuss it. I definitely would have wanted to discuss all of it.
All right, so now we're voting on the motion as amended, right? Yeah. All right. All those in favor of the motion as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay, what's this?
A show of hands might be helpful.
Okay. All right, all those in favor of the motion as amended, raise your hand. All those opposed to the motion as amended, raise your hand. The motion fails.
No amendment.
Well, there's nothing.
We did not recommend this.
Right, but we did not recommend it either.
The motion to recommend approval has failed.
Thank you.
Now you're back in the
Move on, Chris, thank you.
Well, I don't know.
Just what you wanted.
So,
No, we're not moving on.
do we have to further discuss this, or?
You're back in discussion.
We have to make a recommendation to the board.
One way or another, you have to make a recommendation.
Okay. You've heard the authority. What's your wishes? Mark?
I think if we discuss it and get a few things straightened out here, I think we can still make it work. I think it's a good idea. I think it's something that's going to be required in time, and I'd like to see it go, but I think there's a few things that we just need to get figured out, and when we get them figured out, then it should work. I think we just have more discussion to do.
We only got 58 minutes left before the storm's supposed to get here, so let's get started. Vince?
I'm going to suggest it as a vehicle to facilitate what Mark is talking about. If we had a couple of concrete examples, it's easier for me to process. For instance, when I think of an interim use permit, I think of something associated with road construction. Okay? And when I think of a conditional use permit, I think of a residence or a building, which is going to be there forever. And if we could use those as examples, and if somebody thinks that a building should have an interim use permit, or a gravel storage area should be a conditional use permit, perhaps they can, does that make sense?
So you're saying it should be at the discretion of the petitioner?
I'm not talking about the petitioner right now, just so the people are talking about the philosophy of an IUP or a CUP. If I want to build a group home that's 6 stories tall, made out of brick, I doubt very much I'd be applying for an IUP. And I think staff would guide me that way. Does that make sense? On the other hand, something that my neighbors want to be temporary, like your rock concert, then that clearly fits into the IUP.
We have the rock concert covered, but Steve, you had something.
No, I think he,
We're prolonging the discussion Chris was trying to bring to an end. Whether it be an IUP or a CUP should be at the discretion of the petitioner after they've been informed of the differences. And if they select a CUP and the county thinks there should be a date on it, they can put it on as a condition. We have that already.
You know, one of the things that has been discussed over these many months is somebody who's wants to put a house trailer on a farm so they can take care of their aging parents. And, you know, you apply for that. That should probably be interim, people say. but somebody has put $100,000 into this house trailer and a construction, and what are you supposed to do? Burn it? Your permit to have it there, you know, it's an asset, but it's really at the end of it, you gotta do something with it. So maybe your farm has expanded, maybe you got a kid that's got a problem, but now you gotta come back in and get another permit? I mean, that should be until the damn thing has to be torn down or sold. It should be left to the landowner. If we don't want it there in the first place, I don't want to turn this area into a trailer park, but if we're going to approve it and it ends when the last parent dies, what are you going to do with it? Are we going to have a situation where some overzealous government employees out there insisting that we're going to fine you $500 a day until you get it out of here? Okay? Think about that. That should definitely be a conditional use permit.
So I agree with all that. But there's a lot of things that really don't fall into either one or the other, except for what the applicant wants. I'm thinking of a solar facility. One person may want it permanent to go with the land. The next person might think they're going to get their permit better, easier, faster, if there's an end date to it. A concrete facility to support something like temporary construction on I-90. 3 years, it's done, it's over with. A CUP seems wrong to me for that. Sand mines, any mining, I think could be either way. I think the petitioner may want permanent. I would want it permanent, runs with the land. Somebody else might not. Events, I agree with everything Mark said, but there's a place for interim use permits. Where my support was lost was when the language was incorporated that staff is the one that dictates whether it's an interim or a conditional use permit. It has to me, it has to empower the citizen. It has to be a tool for the citizen.
Okay, could
Mr.
I,
Chairman,
If we can't get there, I can't support it.
Mr. Chair?
Donnie's,
I call the question.
There's no motion.
Oh, I make a motion to call the question.
On what? There's no motion to call.
There's no motion.
Oh, there's no motion to approve, okay.
Stephanie.
Just to clarify, it doesn't specify in here who requests the date. It's, that language is absent. It doesn't say that the county board is the one that decides. It does not say that the petitioner is the one that decides.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yeah.
That's too vague, because I asked
I think we're caught in pedantics here, okay? If I want to do road construction and have a temporary site, I come in, I get the paperwork for an IUP, I am choosing to apply for an IUP.
Choosing.
Yes, but if I choose to get an application for a CUP,
Maybe you want the concrete plant permanent. Maybe you want to serve other people when you're done with the project.
well, okay, but I mean, that's
Should
where,
be your choice.
that's where the county comes in and asks about what, you can apply for whatever you want. It is up to the
no.
county to approve it or not.
No, that's where I got stuck right away.
It's up to it's always up to the county on an IUP or a CUP. It is always up to the county to approve or not approve them.
When you say
Mr.
county,
Chair.
you mean the planning commission and county board?
Exactly.
Mr. Chair.
Anything that is not considered, if I may continue, anything that is not considered a permitted use, which is what you were talking about, okay? It's up to the county, it's always up to the county to approve it. So if they apply for one or the other, it's up to the county to approve or disapprove. I don't know where you're different. I mean,
I don't know where I can be any more clear. It's what are my needs as a constituent and a citizen? Do I need a temporary concrete plant or do I need a permanent one? Do I need a temporary solar array or do I need a permanent one? Do I have an event that has an end date or do I have an event that's going to go on into perpetuity? So I want to be able to come in and have the tools at my disposal, and I want to be able to give the citizens tools for them to have at their disposal to give them the most flexibility that they could need to drive our economy. And
Mr. Chair.
Council?
And that was all taken into consideration when we worked on this. The expectation is that it is a single application for conditional use interim use. The application would walk the applicant through the question, is there an end date that would be appropriate? All the questions that they should consider. By the end of that, it would be clear whether or not it's appropriate to be an interim use or a conditional use. So that's the goal of all of this, is to make it one streamlined process where the information is all gathered and the outcome is the way that it should be, and it's up to the county board to decide what the correct conditions are to attach to the permit for exactly what they want to do, given that whether it has a date or an event that would trigger a termination.
Steve?
so for me, it has to be in the ordinance, not in, you come in and the county walks you through it, because there's change in employees, there's change in political environment, there's change in people at this table that are going to interpret it. I've been in that boat where I was able to pick up the pages of the ordinance and figure out what my interpretation was, use an attorney if I needed to defend it, and this leaves too much gray area for staff to say, I'm going to steer you through it this way, and it's messy for both the citizenry and for staff. I mean, why not just have it in black and white in the language we're creating?
Mr. Chair?
Wait, now, since I'm chairman, I'm going to ask my question next. Okay, one of the biggest problems we've had in Winona County in the last 20 years is family night on the farm. Is this going to solve that problem, or are we just, this isn't going to have a,
It will to some extent. It will.
I mean, period. I don't mean to some extent.
It's city and farm, it's city people.
That's covered.
Provide a different vehicle and a better tool to address family night on the farm.
That's the right answer.
Can you explain what this better tool is?
Because this says it's not perpetual. So right now, when we issue a conditional use permit for family night on the farm, it runs with the farm forever. If we do it this way, through an interim use permit, it's valid for the date of the event, and then it's no longer effective. So it's not a perpetual event going on at that particular location.
So I thought I heard her say that this is not a solution.
It's a partial solution. It's not a full solution because there's a lot of issues relating to family night on the farm. That's just one of them. Some of the other issues relating to having that fall within the large assembly ordinance, and that's also being reviewed. But this is taking priority right now because this is the one that's before.
So one other question. I don't know if we're that far or not, but
If we need to.
for an event, say for instance, family night on the farm, is it going to be the same amount of staff time and the same amount of dollars for the applicant to have a temporary use as what it is to have a conditional use? Because it seems to me like if we're trying to streamline things, it seems like it shouldn't cost me as much to come in and get a permit for a one-night event as what it costs me to get a permit for a sand mine.
Okay,
In terms of the large assembly permit and the amount of staff time in different departments and the Minnesota Health Department and the number of people that touch different parts of serving food to a couple thousand people, the staff time involved is pretty much identical. The highway department has to be contacted. Either way, you don't save any time, so the permit fees wouldn't necessarily be saved. It seems like it would, but it's the identical same amount of work. The difference is right now the large assembly permit requires a CUP, which means Polly Graydon, who works in the administrative part of the county right now, and her husband can continue to run family night on the farm in perpetuity because they have a CUP on their property for it, which is not desired by them. So that, the other reasons we have to change the large assembly permit is because it refers to a health department branch for food inspection that we no longer have, so we just need to do some updating, basically, and maybe turn it into Thank you.
That's supposed to be illegal. Kelly?
So in the interest of trying to find a compromise, to address the concern of the applicant petitioner choosing which one they're going to apply for, would it be possible to separate an IUP and CUP, the application materials, into two separate things, applications, so that the petitioner can apply for whichever they choose? It will always still be up to the Planning Commission and the County Board to approve the petition or not. Is that a reasonable compromise?
We could still have one application and just have a checkbox. Applying for an interim use permit, applying for a conditional use permit.
To answer that, I thought on page 13, 5.5, where it's underlined red, a permit for a use with an identifiable date or event for termination shall, if you just change that to may.
Where is this?
Page 13 of the packet.
Right there. Shall.
5.5? Oh, gotcha, okay.
15?
Shall
13.
makes it mandatory that the department issues it as an interim. May would change the entire meaning of that.
But you can't issue a conditional use permit for something with an identifiable date or event for termination. That's what this.
It says interim, it says interim use, may be interim. Permit,
Interim use can be, so that last sentence, a permit for a use with an identifiable date or event for termination shall be issued as an interim use permit. You can't issue a permit for a use with an identifiable date or event for termination as anything but an interim use. That's what the statute says, and that's what the ordinance would allow for. So if there's no identifiable date or event for termination, then it's a CUP.
Okay, so do we need language that doesn't allow the county board or the planning commission to issue, if I have checked the box for the conditional use permit, that we not be able to change the permit type to an interim use permit? Is it possible to add language that does that?
We can, but that's taking the normal discretion away from the county board that they have on every other.
Right.
It might be helpful to, has anybody been through, start with the ag district and go through the condition list? There's like 33 conditional use permits that are listed out. If you go through there, a lot of those conditional use permits, as they're written, indicate, some of them actually say temporary. You know, it'll actually say it's for a temporary use. So if somebody was applying for something, they'd still be applying under, you know, that ordinance section and that specific entry under there. So either you're applying for a dwelling, you're applying for a temporary mobile home. It's inherent in the ordinance already. That's where we would be following exactly what the ordinance says and what the person applies for. So when somebody comes in and says, I want to apply for a mobile home or home health care, it's inherent in the ordinance. It's only allowed in the ordinance to be temporary. Okay? So in this case, that would be an interim use permit if we adopted what we were planning on doing. They don't have the option to come in and say, we want it to be a conditional use permit because we want it to be there forever, because the ordinance actually doesn't allow that. So there are specific permits, conditional use permits that would be interim, and there's other ones that would not be interim. They'd be conditional use permits because they are in the ordinance. The ordinance says that they are permanent. So there wouldn't be any kind of, for us, there wouldn't be any kind of like, oh, we're going to make you do something you don't want to do. It's more like somebody is applying for what they want to do. It fits under the ordinance, and it's either a conditional use permit or a conditional use permit. It's one or the other. And the ordinance tells us what that is.
Arlie.
What? We could sit here and beat our heads against the wall all night. Why isn't there a way that you can, when somebody comes in to apply for one or the other, say, they're going to tell you what they're applying for, and say, well, this is your choice. You take this one or you take that one. Let them apply for what they want. I mean, they're going to have in black and white in front of them. You know, is there a big problem doing that?
No, that's what's intended, is they.
Well, then, that's,
That isn't what this says.
Isn't that what I said just a couple minutes ago?
so to speak, yeah.
The application would be, their application.
I mean, make it simple.
You can check the box, I'd like to apply for a conditional use permit, and then when you fill it out, if you figure out it's more appropriate for an interim use, that can be addressed, but they can ask for whichever one they want.
Well, let them see the difference, you know.
Give them a single application.
That's a great idea,
Mr.
Arlie.
Chairman, I know you won't
Excellent
entertain a negative motion. Maybe you will.
Well, it's not up to me to entertain it, but
I move that we do not approve this going to the county board as drafted.
That's not an option for you today. Your
This was my-
options today are, you can recommend approval, you can recommend rejection, or you can recommend approval with modification.
I move to recommend rejection, Mr. Chair.
okay. It has been moved that we recommend rejection of the interim use permits. Is there a second? Is there a second to this motion? Is there a second to the motion to, what was the word? Recommend rejection to the interim use permits discussion. Hearing none, the motion fails.
Mr. Chair.
No, wait a minute now.
Oh, we're going to vote on it? No, we're
No.
not. There's no motion, but I'd like to continue with the discussion.
Mr. Chair,
Mark,
I move we approve this interim use permit as changed or as amended by the council.
okay, is there a second to that?
I'll second.
Okay, that's been moved and second that we approve the interim use permit zoning ordinance changes as stated by Stephanie. Is there any discussion?
Yes, that doesn't address the concerns that we've had tonight. And I think that the staff has full recognition of the sentiment of where the earlier majority vote took us. And they should come back with some language that expressly takes care of our concerns, not a late sentence in 5.5. You have to go back to the very beginning. Temporary use of property, the first red line, interim use. Until the occurrence of a particular event enumerated in the application, perhaps, pick a word, enumerated, anticipated, specified, named, what, in the application, and strike or until zoning regulations no longer permit it. We've acknowledged that they'd be grandfathered if they had such a permit, but that phrase makes it all ambiguous, subject to future interpretation by a different board and planning commission and board. So the staff has the sentiment of what we want, or the majority here appear to want. Let them come back with some language to that effect, and then and then approve it or deny it.
Gene,
Richard.
since we're in discussion, I actually thought we were getting somewhere with.
You're optimistic.
Well, yeah, well, I am. The latest conversation when you were discussing the varying temporary versus permanent, the way it's written now, would we not be facilitating the interim use permit if those items, and I don't know, I'm just throwing this out, if we took those items that are time limited now, somehow or other, and threw them into the interim basket, under the same guidelines. Stephanie's going to answer that.
That's what we started with when we first brought this to you, and you asked us to review this instead.
Yep.
Right.
Well,
This is way better than that.
it is.
It's way better than that.
Okay, all right. I guess I know where everybody is, so.
Any further discussion?
Well, yeah, so before Mark made his motion, I was trying to formulate a motion, and I was trying to do the math. And with the 60-day extension, do we have the next meeting to decide on this before it goes back to the board?
You do, it's not, the recommendation is due by, I believe, November 15th.
60.
2 more meetings.
One more meeting, I believe the November meeting is outside of that.
So I was trying to, my thoughts, the motion I was trying to put together was more along the lines of having staff bring back the language that we've kind of parlayed tonight on wanting this to be a decision in the, or from my point anyhow, wanting it to be that many of these could be either a conditional or interim, and I'm kind of don't think I'm hearing that from Lou. I think I'm hearing they already are one or the other, and I think there's a lot of them that could be either, and I don't think I'm getting that from you.
Right, I mean, there are things like you said earlier, the,
Sand mine, solar array.
the solar array, the sand mine.
Well, those are big ones.
I guess my preference, and what I proposed originally would be to put those in a basket for you guys to decide. Is the county gonna
One or the other.
look at interim, or are we going to look at them as conditional use? And otherwise, what you have is you do have people just coming in and asking one way or the other, either or, but then you have it open for ambiguous decision-making at this level, with the planning commission and county board level as well. It's kind of whichever the wind is blowing, whoever's sitting here in your guys' seats.
But we should be getting an application for one or the other. It's not us, it's not, and either we're going to approve the interim use before us or the conditional use before us, whichever the applicant makes.
Or you're going to deny it or put conditions onto it that make it.
Yeah, but it's not,
temporary.
it's not which way the wind is blowing about whether we're going to issue them an interim or conditional. That's got to be the applicant's decision before it comes to this level, I think.
Is there any other discussion on this motion?
I need to understand the language. So Mark's motion was to,
Read it over again, council.
It would be a motion to recommend approval as revised, and the revision was to add the sentence to 5.5 stating any such permit shall specify the date and or event of termination.
I believe it's identical to the motion I made.
yeah, I don't see where I guess I don't see where it solves the issue of adding flexibility to the applicant. Whether they,
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Shelley.
were we going to have a check mark box to indicate whether the applicant was applying for an interim or a CUP? That's where it gives them their choice. When they've got the paperwork, they go, IUP, I choose IUP, or I choose CUP.
But I believe if they choose a CUP and this body decides to put a date on it, it was just converted to an IUP.
That is correct.
Mr. Chair,
Donnie?
none of that addresses this comma or until zoning regulations no longer permitted. None of that addresses it. That's one point. Second point is
Yeah.
With our competent legal staff, we should surely be able to draft a condition to put on a conditional use permit that makes it clear that the conditional use permit is an interim use without using the word permit. We have competent staff that can do that, I know, and we don't have a problem. We just go with what we have and adapt to that.
Any further discussion? Okay, this time we are going to vote on the motion to recommend the approval of the zoning ordinance changes for interim use permits with the sentence added at, in what part? 5.5. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
I guess we're going to have a show of hands again. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, raise your hand. It passes 5-4.
It passed?
Yeah.
Where?
Do you want to do it over?
Okay, do it over again.
I didn't see the fine.
It did, it passed.
It passed. 5-4.
Chris and Vince.
Arlie.
Okay.
So, is that solve this problem?
We now have the recommendation for the county board, and we'll move on to the next step before the county board can have this discussion about whether or not the ordinance should be amended as proposed.
Okay. I believe the next part is, Kay, are you going to tackle this one, or?
Yes.
Mr. Chair and Planning Commission members, I did not receive any input from the memo that I sent in regard to potential future revisions of 510.5 and 510.6 of the Winona County zoning ordinance. This has to do with various enforcement of standards of the zoning ordinance, such as soil erosion and sediment control. There are points that were listed in the final report that we wanted to bring to your attention as a potential for a recommendation to the county board to put 510 and these sections, or all of 510, on the list of things for staff to work on, for you then to review and provide input on as soon as we get to the bottom or get concluded with the current list that we have approved by the county board. There's enough things that were brought up, you know, when we really started digging into it. It's bulky. It isn't to give more responsibility or more authority to staff or the planning director, or less authority to the Soil and Water Conservation District. Like many of the ordinances we've been charged with by the county board through the recommendations of the Planning Commission, you know, to tidy them up a bit. I alluded to another one, the large assembly permit, because we don't have a certain kind of food inspection health department anymore, and because a CUP may or may not make sense. It's another one to look at. So staff, along with council, brings forward some things if it gets on the list to work on. And so it's a pretty straightforward recommendation that if this body would like to have us work on it, we should get it on the list of recommendations to add, ask the county board to add to. Not that I need more to do, and the staff, though, is willing, and we'll work on it if you would like to move it forward in that fashion. Thank you.
Is there any comments on this report? Steve?
Yeah, so I read it through, and I've read this section multiple times in the past, and I've wondered about the authority, what was intended, whether it would be board member of the Soil and Water or staff and what the intention was there. My sense is that a constituent would not want to have their connection to their elected Soil and Water district representative cut out of it, and this kind of indicates that maybe you think that staff should be the one representing the Soil and Water Board.
I actually, if you don't mind my informally jumping in, Mr. Chair, I would actually prefer both because oftentimes we have a commissioner present or a planning commissioner present and staff. So I just don't want to preclude one or the other. If the Soil and Water Conservation Board member would like to join staff, sometimes staff has the specific technical training, and it's worked out sometimes where two township officials come instead of one because they're interested and they want to, recognize their voice. We want to be inclusive if possible. We want to prevent one or the other from attending, so maybe cleaning up the ordinance a little bit wouldn't hurt.
So I can see looking into it. And the other thing is, it seems like it happens pretty frequently here that Soil and Water staff weighs in on our decisions at the last minute, which we've expressed our frustrations with many times that, why didn't the petitioner know and why did this come in at the last minute? And we've gone over that time and time again, so I don't know if there's anything that we can clarify in the language so that if Soil and Water wants to weigh in, that it's done in a timely fashion for the petitioner and for our board. But it also leaves me wondering, as I read through it, how does the Soil and Water staff, and basically it's, in this case it's Darrell Buck, become kind of the one-stop shop for our standards? I mean, it seems like there should be something written that the constituent, the citizen should be able to look at. It just says that we rely on Soil and Water staff, and if staff looks at one farm and it's organic and it's moldboard plowed and water's running off the field, they might not look, they might just look the other way, and next place they don't like that person's practices and they've got to meet literally tens of thousands of dollars of regulations. So why doesn't the citizen have something black and white to look at instead of what I would consider to be a moving target of whatever Darrell Buck says?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Jacob, because this is actually a group that does these inspections, they make a recommendation to the lead staff member of the soil, the SWCD, who then provides an analysis and works back and forth with staff here and with the complainant site to come up with resolution. So, I don't know what Darrell's position is about his comfort level with being thrust in that role when it's a Winona County zoning ordinance. That's, I guess, one of the things that I'm sure he'd want to be here if we were working on this and clarify the SWCD's position on it. We take advantage of their technical expertise, and we have in-house technical expertise, and then kind of work together to work out a plan based on the recommendations of the inspection.
So for me, that's where it really becomes a moving target for the citizen. If you read the information, the last page, second to last paragraph, the last sentence says, however, many of the situations we get involved in are beyond our technical expertise and need an engineer or other technical professional to develop a plan. So on one hand, you're telling the applicant, we don't know exactly what you need. We know that what you're doing isn't good enough. You need to hire an engineer or a technical professional, but we really don't have the technical expertise to tell you whether that what you hired and had done is suitable. I mean, it's a vicious circle that the constituent can never hit. And I think there needs to be some kind of, it's at the discretion of Darrell Buck, largely.
And this is kind of why we're talk about it and figure out if we need to have revisions to address some of those concerns.
Okay.
So council, you're saying that at this time, we should either approve a motion to have it added to the list or deny it, right?
To recommend that we have a discussion about ordinance changes relating to this section. And actually, I would suggest 5.10 as a whole, the entire enforcement section. I know that there's issues with other areas of that as well, and that's going to be coming as a part of an incremental.
Richard?
Just to go back a ways, first meeting that I had on planning and zoning about 6 years ago, I think it may have been Board of Adjustments, but a condition on what we were approving was that once we were done with this, Soil and Water was going to come in and have his way with the applicant. I felt that was illegal as heck. I've had excavators come and tell me how we had approved something, but boy, when he got on the job, Larry Buck said, Darrell Buck, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do that. Do we have to? I said, I don't really think you have to. It's been approved. Throw him the heck off. I don't know what his whole regime is, but I've had people who applied for variances, and the day they get there, a white paper shows up on my desk, and he gets a copy, and he is blindsided totally by this vitriol that's a 2-page memo. I just don't think that that is professional. If planning and zoning, and I believe planning and zoning knows how to do the job, okay, they can use this guy as a source, but I don't know how he got to have veto power over everything that planning and zoning does. I don't know. But if you can work on that, that would be fine.
So I would make a motion to have staff review this and we'll see if we can help resolving those.
The whole
Mr. Chair.
10.4 section?
Just to clarify, that would, so section 5.10, and it would be, it's a recommendation to the county board to add it to the list of revisions. That will approve that list.
That clarifies.
Okay, all right. Is there a second to this motion?
Yes.
Arlie seconds it. Any other further discussion? All right, Donnie.
I have some discussion. Does staff have some sense of where you're trying to go with this, Commissioner Jacob? And
You have to ask staff.
There's been some procedural snafus, I guess would probably be the reviews relating to enforcement as a whole, so we've been kind of working to streamline some processes, which is why I suggest we look at all of 5.10. But in particular, the one that's before you, the 5.10.4, was the one that kind of brought this all to a head. So you can see some of the concerns that we want to make sure got addressed. There may be others, and as part of that discussion process, we would probably do it very similar to how we dealt with the interim use permits here, where we had working sessions in advance to brainstorm, figure out what the issues are before we actually come back with full revisions.
Further comments, Don?
I think there also needs to be something in the ordinance that spells out due process. Maybe there is spelled out. I don't know that it's being followed if it's in there. For instance, if a complainant brings in a complaint, how is that person kept in the loop as to the process of an investigation of the complaint? And
That is one item that's been identified recently as something we'd like to look at as well.
so that you include that sort of rework?
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to have the staff look at 5.10 in its entirety, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
The Motion passes. We need a Board of Adjustment update.
I did not make the meeting today, but I did check the applicant. They did get a form. The applicant did get his approval. He was requesting 1 foot side yard. I wasn't there, so I don't know what went into it. It's my understanding that he got a 4 foot easement so he could build a garage. I thought he'd get a 1 because the neighbor had a 1 foot up against his lot line. So anyway, I don't know what the discussion was, but that's the bottom line.
County Board update.
So the Brogan, Wolford, Johnson CUP, that was approved, and a 60-day time extension was granted.
Thank you. All right. Is there any further business to be brought before the Winona County Planning Commission?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Arlie moves to adjourn. Mark seconds it. All those in favor of adjournment say aye.
Aye.